Here it is, guys. The last of the 3 major camera manufacturers has released its full frame mirrorless camera.
Yeah, honestly, we're really stoked about this. There's a lot to like, whether you're an existing Nikon shooter or coming to mirrorless or Nikon for the very first time. So we did some really cool shoots with this, so we're really excited to show you what we did with the Nikon Z6.
So we always like to talk about, our 3 major things that kind of stood out to us when a camera company releases a camera, and Nikon did really, really well with this. I would say my number 1 would be image quality. I love that, compared with Nikon's famous dynamic range, this really does stack up well, and I really like it.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines, I like that Nikon didn't kind of shy away from some of the advantages of mirrorless cameras. So we have things like the image stabilization built into the sensor and things that companies like Canon and Fuji have been a little hard to implement on that. And then my third would probably be video. I mean, this is an unbelievable video camera and something that Nikon has never really been known for. I think you're going to be really amazed by what this camera can do. So let's talk about the hardware of this camera. I mean, when you first picked it up, what were some of your thoughts on it?
Oh, I absolutely love it. Coming from a Sony A7III primarily right now, I do find that it is quite similar. It's got the smaller, body and everything, but I don't feel like I'm losing my grip on the other side. Whereas a Sony, my pinky constantly falls off. I have longer fingers, so the buttons are all in a great place. I really think they did a great job with this.
Yeah, overall it feels really substantial in the hand. I do like it a lot. Also for a sub $2,000 camera, we're getting a lot of weather sealing on this. Nikon has really sealed this thing up good. And then on the back, we get this really high resolution. It is a tilt screen, not a flip screen, but it's 3.2 inches. High resolution, very good colors. And then this viewfinder that I've talked about before, it is extremely high resolution. It is amazing to look at, one of the biggest ones that you'll find on any mirrorless camera to date, and it's just great to have something like that. It is a lower refresh rate at 60 Hertz instead of 120, but honestly, I didn't notice it at all. It was probably my favorite one on the market.
Absolutely. Coming from a DSLR shooter, you have to press play to see your photos, and it's really a great option to just see what you're going to get inside your viewfinder. It really is priceless to me as a wedding shooter because I can shoot live while I know what I'm getting. And given how high quality this is, Nikon did a fabulous job on it.
Absolutely.
The touch to focus worked really well, no lag. It's very comparable to the Canon EOS R. On that, I did not find any problems. Now, if you're like me and I'm not always looking for the viewfinder, if you watch my behind the scenes of my wedding photography, I always use my LCD screen in the back just because I don't like always putting the camera. I like interacting with the people that I'm photographing. And honestly, it was great.
Yeah, honestly, the 2 big negatives that I have on the function buttons or the overall hardware is that these function buttons are kind of a little bit harder to reach depending on your fingers inside this camera right here. But the big thing on that is if you're on a tripod or shooting video, your hand is not around these grips, and so these 2 buttons are basically useless to you.
Yeah.
And while you do have some customization on buttons like the AF on button, the problem is you only have a couple different options on those. So if you want to open up all the customization, which this camera actually has a lot of customization,
yes,
you have to use these function buttons, and they're kind of buried behind the grip, and you don't have any on the back. So when I was shooting video or locked off on a tripod for my landscape shoots, I had no ability to access those functions. The only good thing is that this I button right here gives you access to so much control, fully customizable. I use it a ton. You can use it with the touchscreen. It's really great.
So, image quality, Nikon did an amazing job. Obviously, there's nothing exceptional about it being the lower end of cameras, but post-image editing was phenomenal. I loved how much I could push my pictures, and just it honestly nailed it every single time for me.
Yeah, 24 megapixels is about what most other cameras are delivering. We have a signature dynamic range of Nikon's cameras. There is a little thing that I've seen with people pushing those shadows that you can see some banding in it. Honestly, I didn't really see it in any shots that we took. You'd really have to be in the absolute wrong place, wrong time, and really be pushing those shadows to see it. So overall, we were really impressed with our image quality. Even in low light, this thing looked really good. Again, not much better than anything else that we've seen on the market, but among the best for sure.
Yeah, I actually shot a wedding with a Nikon Z6, and I do have to say I was shooting at sunset. The bride and groom, obviously you see in this picture, is just beautifully well lit. There's no banding. It looks absolutely amazing. Battery life is definitely better than I expected it to be. Now, it doesn't quite last all day, but given you have a very high resolution screen and viewfinder, it worked really, really well. Now, for all you Nikon users, greatest advantage is you can still use the battery system that you have been using on your other Nikon systems. Now keep in mind, the older D850 batteries will not allow USB charging. The camera does support USB charging, but you have to use the new Z6 batteries for it to work.
I really like that Nikon is giving us a lot of the features that should be on mirrorless cameras, like 5-axis image stabilization, which performed extremely well for both photos and videos. Nikon is claiming about 5 stops, and I think it's great. We used it for both, and it's awesome to be able to have image stabilization with lenses like that 105mm 1.4. Unbelievable, and I really like having it. Even with video, it was very smooth. Even keeping it on while panning or using a gimbal, I found it one of the best image stabilization systems out there for video, and certainly the best one with full frame cameras. We also have a silent mode, which again is on most mirrorless cameras and should be. I absolutely love it, especially on this camera, because this camera has one of the best time-lapse apps and time-lapse functionality of any camera out there, and being able to do that with silent shooting so you don't have any shutter wear, anything like that, makes this and the Z7 really the all-time greatest cameras for time-lapse shooting.
Lenses. So Nikon obviously released newer lenses with the Nikon Z6, and I do have to say I'm fairly disappointed with what they released. They are good quality lenses, but they don't match the Canon EOS R releases this year of that 50mm 1.2 beautiful lens. Now, I do have to say, who has $5,000 to spend on lenses for lenses that only work for one camera? That's what I thought.
Yeah, we have those nice lenses with those cameras, but honestly, for most people picking up a sub $2,000 camera, these are probably the lenses you're going to be looking at. They're fairly mid-grade, but they perform very well. They're sharp in the center, even sharp in the corners. They're not my favorite lenses. They're not unbelievable. You will see the bokeh is just a little distracting, especially on the 50mm. We do have a 24-70 f4. Other camera systems have a 24-105. The advantage here clearly is that it's more compact and lighter weight than some of the others, right. But you're trading off some of that extra range. And then also these, I have the 35 on here, she has the 50. These are both 1.8 lenses versus 1.4s or 1.2s on other systems. But again, the advantage here is these are extremely compact and very lightweight. If you are using the adapter, I have to tell you, I think this is a horrible design for it. If you are using tripod plates at all, especially those longer video tripod plates, it forces you to mount the plates onto the adapter itself, which means that every time I switch between the adapter and native lenses, I have to remove the tripod plates and put them on a different area. Also, if you're using a longer plate, it's actually impossible to just remove the lens without removing the plate first. I'm guessing they're hiding a motor in this adapter, but there are so many things I absolutely hated about this design. The focus system on this was kind of an interesting one. I mean, this is the first time in a long time that Nikon has attempted on sensor phase detection. It was kind of a mixed bag. I mean, on the good side, 271 points, which is great. They go all the way to the end of the frame.
Yes.
People coming from a DSLR are going to love the ability that you can move your focus point all the way to the end of the frame and still get great focusing. But
Yes.
the downside is it kind of went anywhere between good and a little bit sketchy in our performance.
Right. I mean, obviously in good light, the camera did really, really well, focused amazing, and I never really had any problems. Now, obviously we don't have eye autofocus, so that is a big issue for somebody like me. I love eye autofocus, especially because I keep my subjects moving. I don't tend to do stagnant posing, whereas the model's kind of moving her hands, kind of maybe even in some backlit situations, and that's what I love to shoot. Now, that was my major complaint for the Nikon Z6, is in backlit situations, the camera really, really was hunting for the subject, and it did most of the time an awful job.
Yeah, I think when you're getting into backlit environments, and especially when you're getting into low light environments, that's when the autofocus system really starts to show that it's just not as good as the best that we have out there, and kind of almost like a last generation for mirrorless camera on sensor phase detection autofocus systems. Now, we do have a couple different modes for autofocus tracking. I found myself having to switch between them so much because none of them were giving me really consistent results. If you want to pick your subject and then track that across the frame, the problem with it is a multi-stage process. You actually have to click, select your subject, and then click again, and that will register your subject and you can track it across the frame. We do have an auto tracking option, and it does have face tracking on there. Again, no eye detection on there. It's pretty easy to switch your subjects between faces. So as we have multiple people in a line, it's really nice to be able to switch between faces, and it does do that pretty smoothly. However, I found it's pretty easy for it to lose a face, and if it's not a subject with a face, then this can kind of fall apart really quickly in this mode. Now, the most reliable was going to be dynamic area AF, but unfortunately it doesn't track at all. So I found myself switching a lot between my subject tracking with the auto and then this dynamic area AF. And just in sports and wildlife shooting, particularly, we did a lot of wildlife shooting on this. I found it very difficult to go between those, and depending on which mode I clicked on, depended on my results, and neither one was giving me very consistent results.
Another mode often missing from mirrorless cameras like the EOS R is a pinpoint autofocus point for hitting smaller targets. Unfortunately, it is contrast only, so you're only able to use it for non-moving objects, and it is really slow, but I'm still glad it has it.
Now, one thing that actually surprised me a little bit is how much I like shooting video on these cameras. Sure, it's a given. You have 1080p at 120 frames per second and 4K at 30 frames per second. Well, maybe that's not a given because apparently Canon didn't get the memo with this, but every other camera on the market got the memo that these are standards that should be in every camera. We're shooting at full frame. There is no crop required on that, unlike the Z7 or plenty of other cameras that shoot 4K like the Canon camera. So this is good, but it is so much more than that. First of all, the bitrate is just over 100 megabits per second, but for some reason the files were playing back so much better on my computer than most other similar cameras were, and I found that great. Also, the grading of these files, I found it extremely easy to grade. I love being able to have a flat mode that's not a log mode inside of these cameras, and if you do want to shoot log, you have to do that externally to a recorder. However, you can actually get 10-bit 422 out to an external recorder. I'll link my favorite recorders. We have a full gear list of all of our favorite lenses and gear for that. I'll link the recorder that you need in that list, so you want to check that out. And also some of my preferred video settings for autofocus and things like that are going to be in that below, so check out the description and you can get all of that information. But overall, I really like that ability. Video low light really looks amazing, up to about 6400, and was usable at even 12,000, which is among the best you'll find in these cameras. The video autofocus was also really good. It was smooth, it kept up most of the time, but again, there was that occasional time and it just liked to lock onto the background and wouldn't let go. But I was really impressed that I didn't see any stuttering, pulsing, and honestly the move seemed very smooth, not distracting at all. I used autofocus for all of these shots and was really impressed. I've actually been using the Z6 as my main video camera for the last few months, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. One interesting thing is the way the camera handles frame rate shooting. So what you do is you actually choose the settings that you want, and then the camera will shoot the fastest it can using those settings. So you're gonna get somewhere between about 5.5 frames per second up to 9 or even 12 frames per second in an extended mode, but really about 9 frames per second is what I'm gonna shoot. And that is going to depend on you locking like your auto exposure. So if you're shooting manual mode, you'll be able to get up to 9 frames per second. If you're shooting 14-bit RAW, up to 9 frames per second. Drop that down to 12-bit RAW and you can actually shoot up to 12 with a couple other things locked, but ideally you're probably going to be in that 9 frames per second max shooting, which is actually amazing for this camera, and that is in full 14-bit RAW. We also have another mode that kind of simulates a zero blackout. What you do is enable H+ or high plus on the shooting frame rates, and what it does is instead of giving you a live preview or showing you the blackout that usually happens when your shutter crosses a frame, it basically just shows you your last frame. I actually like shooting this way for everything except sports and wildlife where you might need to be seeing the frame as you're shooting it. I find that for portraits and things like that, I prefer to be seeing my last frame rather than seeing the shutter blackout. So I actually really like it, and I found it to be more of a feature rather than just something implemented to give you higher speed shooting. Now, one of the reasons we're getting these excellent frame rates and clearing of the buffer is that Nikon is using the XQD card, which I really have a love-hate relationship with this decision on here. It's also a single card slot, and you know our thoughts about that. We don't like it at all. There are so many reasons that we like shooting dual cards, even without talking about redundancy. There's a lot of other reasons to have dual card slots in a camera. This does not. However, that XQD card is enabling super high frame rates and a really quick buffer. A couple things I like about it. It is an expensive card, yes. However, it is actually less expensive than UHS-2 cards, and those are really needed in other cameras like the EOS R and the Sony cameras in order to even get those high speed frame rates or fast clearing of the buffer. And so if you're gonna buy them, XQD is a really nice card. It is extremely well built. It is better built than most SD cards out on the market. And so I really like having that kind of a format of a card for that. However, it's harder to find. The only manufacturer that's really producing them in high quality right now is Sony, and so that creates kind of a bottleneck in the marketplace. So we'll see where it goes on this. Again, I really have a love-hate relationship with these cards, and I've gotten used to them over the time, and you just make do with them, but there are some disadvantages to Nikon using that in these cameras. Another interesting thing is how quickly you can clear the buffer on this camera, and while it doesn't have a great depth to it, the Nikon D850 is better. I found that I never filled it up, because if you give it a second or 2 seconds in between your bursts, it will clear so quickly, and I really never had a problem with it at all.
Overall, this camera is a great release for Nikon. The Z6 honestly is an amazing camera, and I even might find myself investing in one, given I love the image quality as much as my Sony A7III.
Yeah, actually the more I used it, the more impressed I was on it. I actually prefer it a lot to the Z7. The lenses you have might seem a little mediocre, but honestly they're better fit for this camera. I think with the lenses that have been announced, most people are going to be absolutely fine with that, and we should have 5 more by the end of the year, so it's going to be great. Video is great on it. Yes. So other than those little bits of focusing that just were not unbelievable, I think most people are going to be fine using this. Now the big question is, who should buy this camera? I think for Nikon shooters, getting into mirrorless, I think is going to be kind of a no-brainer for them. If you already have your F-type lenses, they work really well on this. Yeah. You love that 105mm 1.4.
I do. I put the adapter on, I threw that on, and wow, let me tell you something. Beautiful, buttery lens. I absolutely loved it on this camera.
Yeah, so for you guys, it's going to be a no-brainer. And then for everybody else, I think you're going to be absolutely fine with the selection that's out there. So this is a very compelling camera, and I'm really glad to see it on the market. And to let us know what you think about it in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe. Check us out on Instagram. We're always posting all of these things. All of these images are out there and a couple more. So be sure to check those out. So thanks guys so much for watching. See you in a new video.